Why are you a feminist? What does that mean?
To me, it means that I fight for the equality of women when it comes to equal pay, equal rights, and especially respect.
I don't feel like I need to go fight for rights that I already have.
Now, when I hear the word feminist, from what I see in the media, I kind of look at it as a victim kind of mentality. I am all about women's rights, women's equality, and more so equality of opportunity.
It does matter to me because you can only know so many victims of sexual assault before you have to care.
The enemy of feminism is a man. It is patriarchy, and patriarchy is a man. It is a system, and women can support patriarchy as much as men can support the fight for gender equality.
Society which is predicated on competition and really very often the ruthless exploitation of one human being by another, the profiteering of other people's problems, and very often the creation of problems for the purpose of profiteering. The ruling ideology will very often justify that behavior by appeals to some fundamental and unalterable human nature. So the myth in our society is that people are competitive by nature and that they're individualistic and that they're selfish.
We have chosen to expose the myth of patriarchy, to address a topic that has become so polarized and seems to be heading toward an impasse worldwide. The conflict is a century-old battle, and which feminism may not be able to fix, because the deep core issues are either misdiagnosed or ignored. And we have to acknowledge them first. This video presentation is going to attempt to highlight important facts that would help heal society. As we've explained in our video about the mind virus reticle affecting human relationships, all these issues are not separated at all, because they all have something to do in common. Control. The control of our minds, bodies, and psyches. The gender war and our toxic consumerism are both spiritual battles. And since it is the metaphysical that drives the physical, there is no other way around. It has become increasingly vital for humans to operate on the same wavelength, or the amount of suffering will continue to increase exponentially because humans just keep adding subjective layers to the same objective issue, and which is the disrespect for life as a whole.
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be with you to discuss this essential topic. Violence against women and girls is a global pandemic. At its core, violence against women and girls in all its forms is the manifestation of a profound lack of respect, a failure by men to recognize the inherent equality and dignity of women.
Patriarchy has been here forever. False. In the prehistoric times, actually the hunter-gatherer tribes were pretty equal. They had different roles. They had men who would go out for the big game hunting, and women who would take care of the children and who would gather different fruits. But still, this division of labor didn't mean any hierarchy between the roles. Patriarchy actually has a start date that we can set around 3,000 years before Christ. So this started to shift the conception of fertility and of procreation. But as well, the development of agriculture, and animal husbandry, private property, and the fact that suddenly the type of economy was changing, and it was needed to know who were your children, to be sure that your lineage was pure, and children became an asset. So from that moment, it was very crucial to actually control women's sexuality, to be sure that women were virgin before marriage, to be sure that they were absolutely faithful during the marriage, because you wanted to control your heritage, right? Basically, the inequality started to be institutionalized in society. Women became goods and commodities that were traded in between villages and between tribes. And the codes started to frame this into the institution. It's not been here forever, and it might not last forever.
We just explained that this new lifestyle came along with the realization that fatherhood was essential to protect agricultural developments in 3000 BC. The intent of owning land, and which brought about the notion of property rights and heritage, both demanding that women to remain virtuous to ensure the lineage. This piece of information is amazing in itself. The commodification of humans was born. This aspect has not changed today, and even worse, every atom on this planet is a stock market asset. In one sentence, we just happened to grasp that owning nature is a folly that must be stopped if we want to survive. Yes, you got it. Centuries of war to defend our own suicidal and selfish behaviors, encouraged by the devotion to entrusted political and religious bodies. From one generation to the next, the awakening has arrived. Nothing will fix capitalism. The state of the planet speaks by itself. It is the premise that must be changed, and a money-free society is now the only option left.
God has always been male. False again. The Greek goddess used to reign supreme from India to the Mediterranean, starting at the Neolithical times, around 7,000 years before Christ, and it lasted all the time until the closure of the last temple in Ephesus in 500 years after Christ. The epicenter was Crete, which saw no sign of warfare for 15 centuries. All this changed around 3,000 years before Christ with the invasions from Indo-Aryans and as well the Hebrews from the south, where they imposed a much more patriarchal way of living, a society which was based on the warrior, on violence, on conquest, and they were revering a male god. And little by little, they eradicated all this culture and worship of the goddess and all the temples. And this was a progressive cultural upheaval. And little by little, myths were created to change the narrative.
When moving beyond the dogmas, all belief systems teach empathy and cooperation in their own words. They only differ from one another when claiming that they are the original doctrine and defining the customs and behaviors of their followers. If we would start paying more attention to what world religions have in common instead, we would see that cultural lifestyles actually prevent from merging with the totality of life. It is unethical for any dogma to attempt dictating societal frameworks, because if they were culturally unbiased, we would have achieved peace a very long time ago. Truth never causes oppression, but liberates. And it is very likely that amid all the turbulences ahead, a better spiritual framework will emerge. A new framework in which genders no longer competitive are to bring this patriarchal structure that is now destroying Mother Nature and our children to an end. Patriarchy once deemed that children were commodities to ensure the lineage. Today they are being trafficked, and little is done about it, because patriarchy demands life to be traded on the stock markets.
Reality is quite the opposite. We have certain human needs. The only way that you can talk about human nature concretely is by recognizing that there's certain human needs. We have a human need for companionship and for close contact, to be loved, to be attached to be accepted, to be seen, to be received for who we are. If those needs are met, we develop into people who are compassionate and cooperative and who have empathy for other people. So yes, you can talk about a human nature, but only in the sense of basic human needs that are instinctively evoked, or I should say certain human needs that lead to certain traits if they are met, and a different set of traits if they're denied.
So men are trash. Men are trash. Ay. That my pain. Some men. We are so sensitive, so fragile. We are literally trying to protect our own sensibilities and our own sense of I'm a good guy, when in fact women every single day are getting raped, kicked, and killed by people you know. People you literally know, people you meet in the office every single day. And then when women are on the timeline saying men are trash, you want to protect
South African
your
Twitter feminists can only go so far in calling out and demanding accountability. But if you decide that you actually don't care, we've seen, then things just continue as they are. So it really is about men calling each other out. And I don't know if we'll ever get...
The situation is pretty dire, as you can see, and the mainstream media are practically silent. People usually living in the upper class don't share such concerns, regardless of their creeds. However, it is quite fair to assume that patriarchy affects 85% of the world population. But we urge you to make your own research, because citing a few examples won't do the situation justice. Instead, we will comment on the future of society. We cannot compare the Earth with the Sun, but both work in symbiosis, together. All humans too complement one another. The skills of one cooperate with the skills of another one. Egalitarianism is only in terms of birthrights. If both genders are different, it is because they complete one another, and new ways of cooperation need to be explored. From now and moving forward, recognizing birthrights as opposed to human rights is essential. Birthrights are defined by the free access to food, shelter, clothing, and education. When education does not teach the nurturing and regenerative aspects of life, we are left fending for ourselves, and competition at a human level causes inequality. But at the core of this situation, we find cultural issues, because nearly all of them in place today have been established by men thousands of years ago. There won't be any middle ground, as they were used to keep women subservient within their own patriarchal structure. The reality is that the world culture itself is on the brink to become obsolete. Gender equality will therefore require to also let go about the past in various ways.
Is that as men have been painted as the brutal perpetrators, ironically enough, the culture has encouraged her to act more and more like a man and validated the expression of her, what feel to her like masculine attributes. And so here we have a subtle subversion of feminism, that where feminism buys into patriarchal values and says, yes, women can be equal, women can be valuable, women can do the things that men have been doing and therefore be validated. So they're taking patriarchal values for granted and actually becoming allies of a patriarchy where women are inserted into the same roles as men. That is not a very deep kind of revolution, and in fact oppresses women.
Although we definitely agree again, we are going to approach another biological aspect, that of genetic memories. There are no human studies considering that our lifespan is too long to keep track record. But genetic memories can be passed down 14 generations. Research on mice and worms absolutely confirms this, and this means that there not only exists a generational memory, but a collective memory. Also that humanity is carried on from an era to the next. As much as the universe is an organism, as a collective we do act as an organism as well, because we are all interdependent. We need each other to sustain our existence. Though, if we look closer and connect more dots, this sheds light on our structural violence, which is clearly embedded in our social structure, and which we repeat despite the fact that we know that violence isn't a solution at all, but cooperation and respect for each other. We need to recognize the triggers and become aware that history is a composite of genetic memories that we must now use for the betterment of humankind. And further, genetic memories are going to reinvent the field of psychology, as our emotions do not belong to us directly. Many are triggers embedded in our subconscious before we were born. The fantastic thing is that now that we know, we can decide to use this knowledge to really change the world.
Patriarchy is beneficial to our men. False again. We do believe that since men have more perks in a patriarchal system, that it's exclusively beneficial to them. And we talk mostly about the impact of patriarchal rules on our women, which is true. But we rarely talk about the impact of patriarchy on our men. We ask our boys to not feel. We tell them to man up. We tell them not to cry, because in a patriarchal system, anything related to emotions is tagged as feminine. And feminine is not appropriate, is not something we want to be, right? So we tell them that they have to be dominant all the time, because if they're not dominant, they will be dominated. And there is so much bullying going on for men who don't fit that man box that leads actually to a lot of suffering and even suicide. We have this constant pressure to prove your masculinity all the time that is creating so much anxiety, which has tremendous figures. We see that there is actually more depression. There is a higher rate of suicide in men. Boys drop out of school much more than girls. We have more homeless men. We have more men in prison than women. All men are suffering, and we're not doing that much about it. To be honest, we kind of oblivious about this situation. But this man box is actually killing our men.
Those privileges, because in me there is vulnerability, a lot of it. But if I can't show it, how am I going to encourage my son to cry when he hurts? When he has never seen me as his father demonstrate that? How am I even going to reach out to him and say, hey buddy, I can see you suffering?
We claim to be civilized, but how dare we when organ and child trafficking are out of control? How can a system drive parents to sell their children and the poor to sell their organs? How can a system be completely inefficient at terminating child pornography and preventing world stock exchanges from selling our DNA to the highest bidders? Because you see, if you look closer, it is all about the emotional and monetary control of the DNA. As thought, it also can affect genes expression. This has been brilliantly demonstrated by epigenetics. Our patriarchal structure keeps our emotions in a state of low self-esteem and has gravely endangered the DNA of every living organism on the planet. The feminine or nurturing principle urgently needs to be reintroduced into our lifestyles, but not with women at the top, or we will end up with another hierarchy. The paradigm must be shifted, with men and women interacting as equal and supporting among a free society, because saving our children will ultimately save Mother Earth. Thank you so much for watching and helping us spread the word far and wide.